Section 1. The arrival of Lady Greystone. It was on a particularly damp and brooding morning in late October that our doorbell rang with the persistence uncharacteristic of civil callers. Outside, the fog curled like pale smoke around Baker Street, and the gas lamps glowed dimly in protest of the suffocating gloom. I had just finished setting down the morning edition of the Times when Mrs. Hudson appeared at the sitting-room doorway, her brows slightly raised and her tone ever so tentative. "There's a lady here to see Mr. Holmes," she said. "Won't give her name. Says it's urgent." Holmes, who had been absorbed in tuning his violin, lowered the bow without looking up. "Show her in," he said simply. Moments later, the woman entered, tall, elegant in carriage, yet shrouded in unmistakable grief. Her skin was pale as alabaster and framed by curls of dark auburn hair tucked beneath a black hat, its veil drawn back to reveal striking, tired eyes. Her gloves were flecked with moisture from the fog, and her traveling coat, though of fine make, bore signs of haste and recent disuse. "Mr. Holmes," she began, her voice low but steady, "I apologize for the intrusion. I had no one else to turn to." Holmes gestured toward the armchair opposite his. "You are quite welcome, madam. My colleague, Dr. Watson, and I are at your service. May I ask your name?" She sat slowly, gathering her composure. "My name is Edith Greystone, widow of Sir Arthur Greystone, of Greystone Manor, in Surrey." The name stirred a faint memory in me, something in the obituaries, perhaps, but Holmes's face registered recognition immediately. "Yes," he said. "I remember seeing a short piece about Sir Arthur's passing. A sudden cardiac arrest, wasn't it?" "That is what the family doctor wrote on the certificate," she said, her voice tightening. "But I am here because I believe my husband was murdered." There was a pause. Holmes leaned forward, folding his hands beneath his chin. "Tell me everything." Edith Greystone exhaled slowly, her gloved hands resting stiffly on her knees. "My husband was a difficult man, Mr. Holmes, powerful, respected, at least in public. But as he aged, he became increasingly secretive, paranoid. After the death of our only son, Edgar, he rarely left his study and trusted no one. He believed people were trying to harm him, to steal from him. At first I thought it was grief, then madness. But now I believe he was right." She opened her satchel and removed a folded sheet of notepaper, slightly yellowed and creased. Holmes accepted it carefully and read in silence. The note was scrawled in an uneven hand. "If they reach me, know this: I was poisoned. I dare not say who. The walls have ears, and the bottle lies beneath the serpent's eye." "It was hidden between the pages of his journal," Lady Greystone said. "I found it 2 days after his death, tucked between the leaves of his travel notes. He never let anyone read that journal, not even me." Holmes tapped the note with a long finger. "Poison, you say? Yet the doctor saw no reason to suspect. He claimed it was a stroke of the heart. Arthur had complained of chest pain in the days prior, but he also had tremors, sweating, hallucinations. He once told me the walls were whispering to him at night." "Whispers," Holmes murmured. "The serpent's eye? Curious metaphor." "There's more," she added. "Since his death, strange things have continued at Greystone. Footsteps where no one walks, locked doors found open, whispers at night. And last week the butler discovered one of Sir Arthur's brandy bottles. had been tampered with, filled with a cloudy residue. Holmes's gaze sharpened. Was this before or after his passing? After, she said, but only days. Watson, who had remained silent until then, asked gently, "Have you informed the local authorities?" She hesitated. They were of no help. Sir Arthur was a man of influence. The coroner is a friend of the family physician. They insisted that death was natural, even called my inquiries hysteria. Holmes rose and paced to the window, gazing through the fogged glass. "And who currently resides at Greystone Manor?" "Myself," she replied. "My younger sister Elena, who returned from Florence to comfort me, and the remaining staff, the housekeeper Mrs. Darlow, the butler Rigby, and a maid named Clara." "Elena," Holmes repeated. "Was she close with your husband?" She hesitated, then gave a thin, polite smile. "Too close, perhaps. Arthur had a tendency to cultivate affection where it was not appropriate." "A lover?" Holmes asked. "Plainly, I cannot say," she replied, her voice cold now. "But she doted on him, and since his death she has shown more sorrow than I could muster." Holmes turned toward her. "Lady Greystone, would you be amenable to Watson and myself visiting Greystone Manor?" "Of course," she said, sitting straighter. "In fact, I hope you would suggest it. I've reserved rooms at the manor for your stay. The carriage awaits downstairs." Holmes smiled. "Efficient. I like you already." She stood and turned toward the door. "We should leave before the fog thickens further. It's a long journey." When she had gone, Holmes turned to me, his eyes gleaming with quiet energy. "What do you make of it, Watson?" I considered. A possibly mad husband, a cryptic note, whispering walls and cloudy brandy. Could be illness, imagination, or something far more sinister. Holmes nodded. "Precisely. A mystery with too many shadows and too few facts. We must go at once." I fetched my coat and medical bag, and within minutes we were descending the stone steps of Baker Street into the heavy mist, where Lady Greystone's black coach stood ready dot as the carriage rattled toward the southern countryside. I found myself reflecting on Holmes's earlier observation about silence being a disruption. It was true, I realized, as we passed through narrow lanes and fields swallowed by fog. Some silences are louder than screams, and at Greystone Manor I feared we were about to enter one of them. Section 2. Greystone Manor, the road to Surrey, twisted like a black ribbon through the countryside, each mile bringing us deeper into a landscape bleached of color by fog and damp. Lady Greystone had remained mostly silent during the journey, her posture upright, her gaze distant, as if rehearsing grief. Holmes, as was his way when engaged in thought, had withdrawn entirely, his eyes half closed, fingers drumming soundlessly on the knee of his trousers, lips twitching now and again in some silent argument with himself. I busied myself watching the countryside slip by, skeletal trees leaning toward the road as though listening, their branches shivering in the wind. The silence within the carriage was only broken once when Holmes asked our hostess, "Tell me, Lady Greystone, were there any visitors at the manor in the days leading up to your husband's death?" She hesitated. "Aside from Elena, none that I know of. Arthur had become reclusive. He hadn't been to London in over a year. His correspondence had also dwindled. He trusted few." Holmes gave a curt nod. "And who managed the estates?" "Finances? Arthur handled most matters personally, she said. Rigby assisted him with books and correspondence, but Arthur rarely delegated. Since his death, the solicitor has stepped in to sort the backlog. We fell into silence again. When at last the carriage turned off the main road and rumbled up a long gravel drive lined with yew trees, Lady Greystone murmured, "We're here." Greystone Manor emerged from the fog like the hull of a ship in deep waters, tall, grim, and angular. Its brickwork had blackened with age, and ivy clung to its northern walls in tangled webs. The front facade bore the marks of a grandeur past. Stone gargoyles framed the entrance, and tall windows overlooked the grounds like watching eyes dot. As we stepped down from the carriage, Holmes paused on the gravel path and scanned the upper floors. Austere, but not unloved. Lady Greystone led us through the heavy oak doors, which opened into a vast entrance hall paved in cold, dark flagstone. A fire had been lit in the hearth, more for civility than comfort, it seemed, and the smoke carried a faint tang of pine and polish. "This way," she said, and guided us down a side hall to a pair of adjoining guest chambers. "I've had these prepared. Dinner will be served at 7. I imagine you'd like to freshen up before meeting the household." Holmes bowed his thanks, and she turned and disappeared down the corridor as soon as the door closed behind her. Holmes swung open his valise and removed a small notebook, which he handed to me. "Make yourself useful, Watson. Start a record. Page 1, occupants of the house." I complied, uncapping my pen. "Very well. First, Edith Greystone, widow of the deceased. Next, Elena Wessex, her sister, returned from Florence. 3 weeks prior to the death," I scribbled. "Then there's Rigby, the butler. You mentioned he found the tampered brandy?" "Indeed. And Mrs. Darlow, the housekeeper, no doubt knows the inner rhythms of this house. Lastly, Clara, a maid of indeterminate age and significance. Any others?" "Not yet. But wait long enough, Watson, and the walls themselves may speak." Holmes then took a slow walk about the room, examining the furniture, the window latches, even the pattern of soot in the fireplace. He did this not from suspicion, but from habit, orienting himself to unfamiliar terrain as a general might. Survey a battlefield dot at precisely 7. We were summoned by the maid. Clara, a slight girl with mouse-brown hair and downcast eyes. She said little and moved quickly, barely glancing at either of us. Holmes made no remark, but his gaze lingered on the faint red marks on her wrists, as if some habitual nervous scratching had irritated the skin. We followed her through a pair of arched doors into the dining room, a long, echoing chamber, lined with ancestral portraits and sconces that flickered unevenly. At the head of the table sat Lady Greystone, her posture regal despite her mourning black. To her right, Elena Wessex, younger by at least 10 years, with golden hair and the sculpted beauty of an oil painting. She offered us a languid smile, her eyes coolly curious. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, welcome to Greystone," she said. "Edith has told us much about you." Holmes bowed. "Madam." Opposite her sat Rigby, the butler, a stooped man with iron-gray hair and a face creased by decades of service. He inclined his head gravely, but said nothing. Lastly, Mrs. Darlow took her seat, plump, pink-faced, with hands that never seemed to stop folding and unfolding a napkin on her lap. She gave us a nervous smile and dropped her eyes. Dinner was quiet punctuated by the occasional scrape of silverware and the low crackle of the fire. Holmes spoke little, preferring to observe. I, however, attempted small talk. "Elena," I ventured, "Lady Greystone said you've been in Florence. Quite a contrast to Surrey, I imagine." She laughed, a sound that carried a slight edge. "Yes, Florence is full of warmth, color, life. Coming back here was like stepping into a mausoleum." "Your sister said you returned shortly before Sir Arthur's passing?" Elena's eyes narrowed a fraction, just in time to say goodbye, though Arthur barely spoke to me at all. He'd taken to locking himself in the study. "And how was his health?" I asked gently. "He was a man ruled by control," she said. "When that control slipped, so did his mind. He thought everyone was plotting against him, even me." Lady Greystone stiffened, her fork pausing mid-air. Rigby spoke at last. "Sir Arthur was not himself those final weeks. He had taken to pacing the halls at night, talking to shadows. He believed the manor was conspiring against him." "Elena claims he accused her of betrayal," I said. "Did he say the same to you?" The butler hesitated. "He rarely spoke to anyone at the end, but I once found him burning pages from his journals in the fireplace. When I asked, he simply said, 'I must silence them before they silence me.'" "Mrs." Darlow wrung her napkin. "The staff began avoiding that wing entirely. The lights flickered. Doors opened on their own. It didn't feel right." Holmes finally looked up from his plate. "And yet none of you thought to question the circumstances of his death?" An uneasy silence followed. "We did," Lady Greystone said finally. "But Surrey is not London." The doctor was satisfied. The coroner was satisfied. The world accepted it. "But you did not," Holmes replied. "No," she said, "because I lived with Arthur. I know what fear looks like. And I know when a man dies with secrets still clutched in his hands." After dinner, we returned to our rooms. Holmes stood by the window, staring into the night as the wind dragged the fog against the panes like the hem of a gown. "Well?" I asked. "Not yet," he murmured. "There are too many masks. They wear grief like costume, suspicion like perfume. But someone is afraid, Watson." "Afraid of what?" Holmes turned toward me, his eyes cold and sharp. "Of what Arthur knew." Section 3. The study in the east wing the next morning dawned dim and gray, as though the sun itself had been swallowed by the perpetual fog that clung to the grounds. Of Greystone Manor, the moors beyond the estate stretched like a colorless canvas, and even the trees seemed to lean inward with quiet foreboding. After a subdued breakfast, Holmes and I stepped into the central hall, where Lady Greystone awaited us in her morning dress, a keyring in hand. "I trust you slept well?" she asked without conviction. "Well enough," Holmes replied, glancing at the high windows through which very little light penetrated, "though your manor does not rest quietly. The floorboards are talkative, and the wind rather theatrical." A flicker of something passed over her expression, perhaps acknowledgment, perhaps dread. "I thought you might wish to begin with Arthur's study," she said. "It remains as he left it." We followed her through the east wing corridor, the air growing noticeably cooler as we moved farther from the hearth-lit heart of the house. The floorboards groaned beneath our feet, and I noticed Holmes running his fingers along the wood-paneled walls, pausing now and then to examine a seam or crack. The study was at the very end of the corridor, a heavy door with a brass serpent-shaped handle. Lady Greystone hesitated before unlocking it. Arthur forbade anyone from entering without his permission, she said. Even me. After his death, I couldn't bring myself to enter. She turned the key with a slow twist and pushed the door. Open. The room smelled of old paper and pipe smoke. The curtains were drawn, but daylight crept in through the cracks, casting long, slanted shadows across the carpet. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, heavy volumes with cracked spines and dark leather bindings. A mahogany desk stood in the center, cluttered with papers and inkwell and a crystal decanter. Holmes crossed the threshold first, pausing to let his gaze roam. "Nothing disturbed," he murmured. "Not even dust patterns altered." "You've kept your staff from cleaning?" She nodded. "I gave orders to leave it untouched until you could see it." Holmes moved to the desk and studied its surface. I watched him trace his fingers along the edge, then leaned forward to examine a small, dark stain near the inkwell. "Wine or brandy, I think," he said. "Possibly spilled during a tremor or fainting spell." He opened the drawers one by one, meticulously, examining their contents with practiced care. Letters, ledgers, and journals were neatly stacked inside, but one drawer was locked. He turned to Lady Greystone. "This one?" She frowned. "I don't believe I have a key for that." Arthur kept certain drawers to himself. Holmes knelt and examined the lock. Simple warded mechanism. "May I?" She nodded. He produced a thin metal pick from his coat pocket, and with a few deft twists, the lock clicked open. Inside were two items, a single notebook and a small velvet pouch. Holmes removed the notebook first and flipped it open. Its pages were filled with short, fragmented sentences, notations, seemingly disjointed. Whispers continue. "Rigby lingers near the cellar too often. Elena asks too many questions. Clara was in the corridor again at midnight. Wine tastes wrong. Bottles misaligned. Heart races at night. Something is in the walls. Must remember the serpent's eye sees all." Holmes read aloud, and as the words filled the silence of the room, I felt the temperature drop. "Madness," Lady Greystone said softly. "Or poison," Holmes countered. He picked up the velvet pouch and opened it. Inside lay a small glass vial with a cloudy amber residue clinging to the bottom. Holmes sniffed it briefly, then corked it again. "I shall test this later. Watson, make a note. Vial recovered from locked drawer. Contents possibly linked to symptoms of paranoia or hallucination." I scribbled it down quickly. Holmes stood, then turned his attention to the bookshelves. He began tapping volumes one by one, listening to the subtle difference in resonance. "There is a hollow space here," he said, pointing to a section of books behind the desk. "These volumes have false spines." He pressed gently, and with a faint click, a narrow panel opened inward, revealing a concealed compartment behind the shelf. Inside, a bottle of Greystone-branded brandy, unopened, but with a faint cloudiness visible through the glass. Holmes took it out and held it, too. "The light. Here it is. Likely the same batch Rigby discovered. Untouched, but stored in secret. That suggests awareness." Lady Greystone's expression had grown grim. "So he suspected poisoning? He either feared it or knew it had already begun. Either way, He hid the evidence. Holmes turned and surveyed the room again. Did he ever write letters to anyone? In the final weeks? None that I saw, she said. But his correspondence was private. Rigby might know more. I'd like to speak to him. Also Clara and Mrs. Darlow again. There is something peculiar about how this house is structured. The whispering he described may not be metaphorical. How so? I asked. Older manors sometimes contain architectural anomalies, air vents, speaking tubes, even hidden passages. If Sir Arthur heard voices, we must ask whether they were imagined or deliberately planted. We left the study shortly after, closing the door behind us. Lady Greystone excused herself to speak with the housekeeper, leaving Holmes and me alone in the east wing corridor dot. As we walked slowly back toward the main hall, Holmes stopped near an unlit sconce and pressed gently against the panel beneath it. It creaked slightly. Hollow, he murmured. There may be more to this house than we see. Do you think someone used hidden passages to spy on him? I asked. If he was indeed murdered, then whoever did so would need access without being noticed. A secret passage would serve beautifully. That evening we sat once more in the drawing room, the firelight playing shadows against the wallpaper. Holmes held the vial in one hand and the diary in the other, studying both in silence. This was no accident, Watson, he said. Someone fed his fear, whether through poison or manipulation. He died frightened, yes, but also certain. And certainty in a man as methodical as Sir Arthur is worth our full attention. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows again, thick and unrelenting. Somewhere within the walls of Greystone Manor, someone had silenced a man who tried to speak. And now Holmes was listening. Section 4. The first cracks in the facade. By midday, the fog had begun to thin, revealing the weathered outline of the Greystone gardens, frost-touched hedgerows, and ancient yews casting spindly shadows across the lawn. The manor, however, remained steeped in an inner twilight, the corridors reluctant to let light pass through their narrow-paned windows. Holmes and I stood once more in the east wing, near the study, preparing for our first round of personal interviews with the staff. Holmes believed that secrets, the kind not written in journals, could be unearthed through conversation. More potent than any confession, we began with Mrs. Darlow, the housekeeper. She received us in the scullery, a bright room that stood in stark contrast to the gloomier halls. A kettle hissed gently on the stove, and the scent of baking bread hung in the air. Her hands, red and flour-dusted, worked instinctively at kneading dough as we questioned her. Mrs. Darlow, Holmes began, I'd like to ask you about Sir Arthur's final days. Did you observe anything peculiar about his behavior? She glanced nervously at me, then back at Holmes. Well, sir, I'd never say the master was cheerful, not in recent years, but he became strange toward the end. Wouldn't eat from any plate unless it came from his own hand. Made poor Clara cry when she brought him soup once. Accused her of poison in it. Holmes nodded. So he trusted no one? Not a soul, sir. Not even Lady Greystone, if you ask me, though he was quiet about it. I think he was frightened more than angry. There were nights I could hear him pacing up in the study, back and forth, whispering to himself. Whispering what? She shrugged. Couldn't say. Sounded like muttering more than words. But one night, I'm sure I heard him say, I know what you've done. Just once. Gave me shivers, it did. And Clara? I asked. What's your impression of her? The dough stiffened under her hands. She's a good girl, Mrs. Darlow said, after a pause. A bit simple, maybe. Has her head in the clouds, but kind. Devoted. She wouldn't hurt a fly, let alone a master she's worked for since she was 12. Did anyone else ever visit the East Wing during those final nights? Holmes asked. Mrs. Darlow considered. This. Rigby passed that way sometimes. Brought the master's brandy. Elena, too, once or twice. Though she always said she was only checking on him. He shouted at her once, told her to leave him be. Holmes folded his arms, gaze narrowing. You say Sir Arthur refused food that wasn't touched by his own hands. But what of drink? Now that ... She said he still took from Rigby. Trusted him more than anyone, though Lord knows why. That answer drew a quiet hum from Holmes. He thanked her politely and requested that Clara be sent to us next. Clara arrived some 15 minutes later, a delicate figure in a gray pinafore, her hands wringing a kerchief with nervous energy. Her eyes darted between us like those of a rabbit scanning for cover. I offered her tea, which she refused with a whispered thank you. Clara, Holmes said kindly, you knew Sir Arthur longer than most. Tell me, what was he like? To you? She swallowed. He was kind, sir, but sad. Always sad after Master Edgar died. I used to clean his study, but not the last month. He didn't want anyone near it. He accused you of poisoning his soup, I said. Her lower lip quivered. He did. I didn't do anything, I swear. I didn't even cook it, Mrs. Darlow. Did. He was shouting, eyes all wild. Said he could taste something bitter. Bitter, you say? Holmes leaned forward. Did he specify anything else? Clara shook her head. Only said it made his heart race. And that the walls were whispering again. Holmes tilted his head. Again? She blinked. Oh, yes. He'd say things like that sometimes. That the walls had eyes. That the wind carried secrets. Once I found a note on his desk. Just said, the eye sees everything, even in the dark. I didn't read the rest. Holmes nodded slowly. Thank you, Clara. That's very helpful. She left in a near run, barely daring to glance at either of us. I sighed. She's terrified, I said. She should be, Holmes replied. There's someone in this house who doesn't want the past disturbed. Clara may not be clever, but she sees more than she knows. Next, we interviewed Rigby, the stoic butler in his modest quarters near the wine cellar. The room was as sparse as the man himself, a single bed, a shaving mirror, a collection of ledgers neatly stacked by the desk. Sir, he said with a stiff bow, I'll answer. What I can. You discovered the contaminated bottle, Holmes said without preamble. I did. I checked the stocks weekly. One bottle had sediment where it shouldn't, cloudy, like ash in water. Did Sir Arthur ever comment on a strange taste in his drinks? Rigby hesitated. He once said a bottle tasted wrong, but he thought it was cork rot. He wouldn't let me replace it. Said if someone was trying to poison him, he'd catch them with his own tongue. And you? Did you ever suspect foul play? I thought he was becoming unstable, but I was loyal to him. He made me promise not to speak of his suspicions. Said the house had become treacherous. Holmes narrowed his eyes. Treacherous how? Rigby looked away. He believed someone close was trying to unseat him, not just murder, but destroy his legacy. He feared Lady Edith and Miss Elena most, said grief had made them opportunists. He trusted you, I said. Rigby nodded once. Until the end. After our final interview of the day, Holmes and I retreated to the study once more. He sat in Sir Arthur's old chair, reviewing the notes I had been scribbling all afternoon. Outside, the light had begun to fade, and the shadows stretched long across the floor. "Well?" I asked. Holmes steepled his fingers. "Every suspect has motive, however subtle. Edith has financial control now. Elena's relationship with Sir Arthur was strained and possibly inappropriate. Rigby had opportunity, Clara access, and Mrs. Darlow knowledge. But who has the will?" I asked. Holmes looked at me. "Someone whose name hasn't been spoken yet. I can feel them lingering in the gaps." He rose and walked to the bookshelves once more. After a moment he pulled aside a heavy volume titled The Lineage of Greystone, revealing not a hidden compartment this time, but a faint etching in the wall behind it, just a trace, barely visible. A serpent coiled around an eye. The serpent's eye, I whispered. Holmes nodded. "It's not just metaphor, Watson. It's a signature." Section 5, The Portrait Gallery. The following morning broke colder than the last, with frost clinging to the manor's tall windows like a veil of glass lace. A brittle quietness had settled over Greystone. Even the creak of the floorboards, so familiar the day before, seemed reluctant to break the silence. Holmes had risen before dawn, and was already dressed and pacing the main hall by the time I emerged from my room. He had not slept much, of that I was certain, and the gleam in his eye told me. He had made some small but significant leap in reasoning during the night. "I take it you've drawn another thread from this tapestry?" I asked as I joined him. He turned slowly, nodding. "The serpent's eye, Watson. It is not merely symbolism, it's a heraldic motif, one linked to the Greystone family line. Are you suggesting it's part of their crest?" "No," Holmes replied, "not their public one, but I found references in Arthur Greystone's journal to a sigil he claimed to have discovered carved into the beams of the west attic. Something ancestral, hidden." I glanced upward toward the high ceiling. "A family secret?" Holmes turned toward the west wing. "We shall see." But before we could investigate further, Lady Greystone found us in the hallway, dressed in a fine but austere morning gown of charcoal velvet. She carried herself with an air of practiced grace, but looked weary. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said. "I was told you had spoken to the staff yesterday. I'd like to ask what is your impression thus far?" Holmes bowed slightly. "Impressions, Lady Greystone, are often misleading. That said, your husband was a man increasingly burdened by isolation, paranoia, and the belief that someone wished him harm. And yet there are suggestions both in his writing and behavior that his fears were not entirely unfounded." A flicker of emotion passed across her face. "Do you believe he was murdered?" "I believe we are walking through the remnants of a carefully constructed illusion," Holmes said. "Someone has crafted this web, knowing the right minds would dismiss his symptoms as madness, but you did not. That makes you rare." She nodded slowly. "Come with me. There is something I should show you." She led us to the portrait gallery, a high-ceilinged chamber with long windows facing the garden. Oil paintings lined the walls, their subjects frowning down upon us in regal silence. A fireplace crackled at the far end, beneath a painting of Arthur Greystone in his younger days, tall, stern, commanding. This gallery was a place Arthur used to come when burdened, she said. He often claimed the portraits judged him less than his family ever had. He was obsessed with lineage, ancestry, bloodlines. Holmes walked slowly from painting to painting, hands clasped behind his back. He stopped before a smaller portrait near the fire. It depicted a man with piercing gray eyes, a high forehead, and a faint scar on his temple. A gold serpent curled around an orb beneath his hand. "Who is this?" Holmes asked. "Elijah Greystone," Lady Greystone replied, "a distant relative. He lived here during the 1790s. Arthur was fascinated with him, claimed they shared something." "Did Arthur ever explain that?" "He believed Elijah was a visionary, perhaps a prophet. He said Elijah had created an inner sanctum, a hidden place of knowledge, or so he believed. Arthur became fixated on finding it." Holmes leaned closer to the frame and ran his fingers along the ornate wood. He pressed gently on the bottom right corner, and with a faint click, the frame released from the wall, revealing a hidden cavity behind it. Nestled within was a thin leather book, its cover marked with the same serpent eye emblem. Lady Greystone gasped. "I never knew." Lady Greystone gasped. "I never knew." Holmes opened the book carefully. It was a ledger filled with dates, symbols, and codes. Interspersed were short passages written in Latin and others in English, fragmented thoughts, odd patterns, and names we did not recognize. "Elena Rigby the Cellar." Holmes handed the book to me. "Watson, this supports the theory that Sir Arthur had indeed uncovered something in his ancestors' trail. He believed this conspiracy whatever. It has had modern branches." "What kind of conspiracy?" Holmes turned to Lady Greystone. "Did your husband ever mention the Order of the Serpent's Eye?" She went pale. "Yes, once. He said it was a name whispered in old journals. A society, perhaps, or a belief system passed down the Greystone line. But I thought it a fiction." He seemed half mad when he spoke of it. "Madness and clarity are often separated by conviction," Holmes murmured. He stepped toward the fireplace and examined the base. "Look here, Watson." A faint scrape barely visible, but it suggests movement. "This hearthstone has been disturbed." I knelt beside him, brushing away some ash. Indeed, the slab was slightly out of alignment. Holmes drew his cane and gently tapped at its edge. A hollow sound. He reached into his coat and retrieved a slim, hooked tool. With a firm but precise motion, he pried the stone loose. Beneath it, a compartment revealed a metal box, small, tarnished, and locked. Lady Greystone looked stunned. "What is that?" Holmes did not answer immediately. He opened the box with careful deliberation, and inside lay several old letters, a silver key with the Greystone crest, and a tattered map one that depicted the manor grounds in a configuration unlike anything I had seen. The map included a series of passages marked in red, crisscrossing beneath the manor's foundations. "There are tunnels," I whispered. Holmes nodded. "And someone's been using them. The whispers Sir Arthur heard may not have been hallucinations after all." He folded the map and slipped it into his coat. "We must explore these passages tonight, quietly. Lady Greystone nodded. "What should I do in the meantime?" "Act as though nothing has changed," Holmes said, "and keep Elena close. I believe she knows more than she's admitted." As we left the gallery, I glanced back at the portrait of Elijah Greystone. His painted eyes seemed to follow us, and in the firelight, the golden serpent at his wrist almost shimmered. That night, long after the manor had fallen into uneasy sleep, Holmes and I crept through the servants' corridor, guided by the map. Beneath the east wing, through a narrow stair hidden behind the wine cellar, we found the entrance to the tunnels cold, damp, and silent, but not empty. Just beyond the first bend, we discovered a fresh footprint in the dust too recent to be mistaken. Holmes knelt beside it, inspecting the size and shape. Female, small, and leading deeper into the passage. "Clara?" I asked. "Perhaps." He straightened, eyes dark with resolve. "Or someone else pretending to be less dangerous than they are." And with that, we descended farther into The Secrets Below Greystone Manor. Section 6. The whisper beneath the air grew colder as we descended into the bowels of Greystone Manor. The narrow stairwell behind the wine cellar, long forgotten by the household, spiraled downward with stone. Steps worn smooth by age and damp. Holmes led the way with a lantern in one hand and the folded map in the other, his face cast in amber light, eyes alert and glinting with calculated anticipation. "What do you suppose we'll find down here?" I whispered, my own voice sounding strange against the surrounding stone. Holmes paused only long enough to murmur, "The foundation of madness or its architect." The passage at the bottom of the stair opened into a narrow tunnel, perhaps no wider than 4 feet, and barely tall enough to walk without stooping. It smelled of mold, earth, and old smoke. Faint symbols had been scratched into the stone walls, some Latin, others indecipherable. Every few paces, a torch sconce jutted from the wall, long cold. "This tunnel predates modern construction," Holmes said, running a gloved hand over the mortar. "Early 18th century, possibly earlier. I suspect the Greystones used it to move discreetly between wings or to escape should rebellion or scandal darken their door." "And now?" I asked. "Now," he said grimly, "someone has repurposed it." After several minutes, the tunnel forked one path, veering toward the east wing, the other toward the western grounds. Holmes studied the map by lantern light. "This left passage leads toward what was once the old chapel," he said, "now sealed and converted into Lady Alana's private drawing room. You think she's using it?" "I think Sir Arthur believed she might be," Holmes said. "And so do I." We turned left. The air here felt heavier, pressing in from all sides. The faintest breeze brushed past my ear, whispering through the cracks and crevices. Holmes stopped suddenly and knelt beside a portion of the tunnel wall. "Look, Watson." There, in the dirt, was a small item, an ivory hairpin. Its stem snapped. Holmes turned it over between his fingers. Delicate. Likely Elena's, or Clara's, if she has the habit of wandering. Either way, this was dropped recently. Perhaps by the person whose footprint we saw. Exactly. We continued forward, the tunnel sloping slightly upward, until it reached what appeared to be a wooden partition, half-rotted and loosely nailed across the corridor's end. Holmes pressed his shoulder against it, and with a creak muffled by damp, it gave way. We emerged behind an armoire, clearly never moved. In a narrow room, with worn velvet wallpaper and a single gas lamp burning low. "Elena's private chamber," Holmes said softly. "She has access." He turned and examined the wall behind us. From this side, the entrance was nearly invisible, disguised as wood paneling. Holmes tested the mechanism and found a pressure latch hidden behind a hinged mirror frame. "Elena didn't discover this by accident," he murmured. "She either learned of it from Sir Arthur or inherited the knowledge." We moved through the room quietly. It was sparsely decorated. A piano in the corner, a chaise beside the window, a writing desk beneath a portrait of Elijah Greystone. But the desk, unlike the rest, was disheveled papers half tucked away, a blotter stained with fresh ink. Holmes sifted through the sheets. "She was writing a letter," he said, "addressed to someone named J.D. Listen, he suspects me. I can feel it in the way he watches. I never meant to." He paused. "The rest is torn away." "Guilt?" I asked. "Possibly. Or manipulation. It's unclear if Elena is afraid of being discovered or afraid of being blamed." He gathered the torn letter and slid it into his coat pocket. "Let's return. We've seen enough here. I want to revisit the portrait gallery." As we slipped back through the passage, Holmes paused once more near the hairpin and knelt too. "Examine the surrounding dirt more closely. There are 2 sets of prints," he muttered. "One small, one much larger, and they're recent. The larger pair leads back toward the wine cellar." "Someone's watching," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I rather hope so," Holmes replied. "Let them think we haven't noticed." Back in the wine cellar, we extinguished the lantern before emerging. The manor above was quiet, the hour approaching midnight. We moved through the kitchen silently and into the west corridor toward the portrait gallery. When we arrived, Holmes went straight to the painting of Elijah Greystone. "This figure," he said, pointing to the golden serpent etched near the hand, "has reappeared in every room where something of importance has been found. A book, a map, and now a letter. It is a trail, Watson, a symbol of knowledge passed through shadow." He examined the base of the frame again, then withdrew a small piece of parchment tucked behind it. On it was a series of dates, each paired, with initials: 4 November, R.G. 9 November, E.G. the 14th of November, A.G. the 17th of November, J.D. 24 November, blank. "Initials," I said. "R.G. for Rigby, perhaps. I.G. Elena Greystone. I.G. for Arthur. What J.D.? "I intend to find out," Holmes said. "But note the pattern. The dates are spaced by 5-day intervals. Sir Arthur died on the 26th, just 2 days after the last entry was due. Someone interrupted the sequence. Or someone ensured it would not continue," Holmes said grimly. Footsteps echoed down the corridor outside. Holmes motioned to the side, and we slipped behind one of the curtains just as a figure passed. It was Elena. She walked swiftly but quietly, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She paused before the portrait of Elijah, touched the bottom of the frame gently, and whispered, "Soon." Then she was gone. Holmes exhaled slowly. She knows the tunnel. She knows the symbols. But does she know what's buried beneath the foundation of this house? We returned to our rooms just before dawn, the manor slowly beginning to stir with its usual creaks and sighs. I lay awake in my bed, thinking of tunnels and portraits, of initials and whispers, and I realized we had not yet encountered the true architect of this deception. We had only brushed against the veil. Section 7, the Phantom and the Pact. By the time breakfast was served in the Greystone Manor's dining room, the fog had returned, curling against the tall window panes like fingers pressing for entry. The house, already dim in its morning attire, now felt submerged, lost in a gray sea, with secrets waiting just beneath the surface. Holmes sat at the table with his customary disinterest in the meal before him, a single slice of toast untouched. His fingers drummed rhythmically against the edge of his teacup, his eyes lost in thought. I knew the signs well. His mind was engaged in a labyrinth of connections, seeking the elusive thread that would unravel the tapestry. "You saw how she touched the portrait last night," I said, buttering a scone. "Like a ritual." Holmes blinked, returning to the present. "Not a ritual, a signal. Elena isn't just aware of the passageways, she is using them. And not alone. Do you believe she's meeting with this mysterious J.D.? Possibly, but I am beginning to suspect something far older is being reenacted. The ledger we found, the map, the symbol of the serpent's eye, and now the initials. It suggests a pattern of initiation, the kind used in secret societies or familial cabals." He paused and added with quiet gravity, "Sir Arthur didn't just uncover a conspiracy. He stumbled into a legacy." Before I could press him further, Clara entered the room, her face pale and drawn. She held a silver tray in her trembling hands and attempted a curtsy. "Lady Elena won't be joining breakfast," she said. "She says she has a headache." Holmes studied her. "Clara, you were in the east corridor last night, were you not?" She looked startled. I was just returning linens to the washroom. "And before that?" "I was in my quarters, sir, all night." He didn't press her, but I noted the way her eyes dropped. She was hiding something, though whether out of fear or guilt remained uncertain. When she left, Holmes turned to me. "Watson, I think it's time we speak with Rigby again. And this time I intend to ask about J.D. We found the butler cataloging ledgers in the study." He rose stiffly, a model of old-world composure, but his eyes betrayed unease when Holmes closed the door behind us. "Mr. Rigby," Holmes began, "you've served this house for decades. You've seen its changes, its tragedies, and its secrets. Tell me, who is J.D.? Rigby hesitated. "I've heard the name only once. Years ago. Sir Arthur mentioned it in passing." "Julian Derwent," he said. "A cousin. A man cast out from the family after a dispute over inheritance. Rumors said he had unorthodox interests." "Occultism?" I asked. Rigby looked grim. "Worse. He believed in the serpent's eye." Holmes' eyes lit up. "So Derwent was real?" "Oh, yes. But he vanished nearly 15 years ago. No one heard from him again. Some say he died abroad. Others that he was seen in the crypts beneath a priory in Wiltshire. Arthur believed he had returned." "Did he?" I asked. Rigby's silence was telling. "I found a torn letter addressed to J.D., Holmes continued. "In Elena's writing, she believes she's being watched, and she fears discovery." Rigby rubbed his jaw. "I suspected something. I've seen a figure twice in the orchard at night, hooded, moving too fluidly to be an old man. Clara once said she heard someone whispering near the kitchen chimney, though she dismissed it as wind. Or someone using the tunnels. I muttered. Holmes nodded. We will need to revisit them tonight. But before that, I wish to examine Sir Arthur's private study once more alone. We ascended the stairs to the east wing. The study remained as we had left it, still, cold, untouched. Holmes walked to the writing desk and removed the drawers one by one. Behind the third drawer, he found a false panel. With a click, it opened to reveal another folded document, this one older, yellowed, bearing the crest of the Greystone lineage overlaid with the serpent's eye. He unfolded it slowly. A charter, he said, written in 1768. It describes a circle of observation, a pact made by certain Greystone ancestors to maintain knowledge passed down from Elijah Greystone, knowledge acquired through obscure means, forbidden practices. Alchemy? I asked, stunned. Perhaps, Holmes said, but it speaks of influence controlling perception, the ability to guide fates unseen. It may have begun as mysticism, but Arthur seemed to believe it was real. He turned the page. A list of names followed, all initials, all dates. Every 50 years, Holmes murmured. The pattern continues. At the bottom of the page, A.G., the 24th of November. But that's the date Arthur died, I said. No, Watson. It's the date he was to be initiated. The final step. You mean he didn't complete it? Or someone ensured he never would? Holmes folded the charter and returned it to his coat. Let's go. I've seen enough. As we exited the study, we passed Lady Edith in the hall. She offered a curt nod and glanced at Holmes' expression. You found something, didn't you? She asked. Holmes smiled faintly. I often do. She hesitated, then added, Watch Elena. She plays a delicate game. We returned to the drawing room as dusk approached. Outside, the fog thickened once more, blanketing the manor in a deep hush. I lit the lamps and poured us tea. Holmes stood near the fire, gazing into the flames. This conspiracy runs deeper than envy or inheritance. Sir Arthur found something beneath the surface, a legacy of control, secrecy, and silent power. Someone else wants it, and they're willing to kill for it. Do you think Julian Derwent is still alive? I asked. He turned toward me. I think he never left. And with that, a sharp knock rang at the front door once, then twice. 3 measured raps. Holmes froze. No one should be calling at this hour, I said. Holmes nodded, moving quickly toward the entrance. I followed, my nerves tightened. Mrs. Darlow was already at the door, hands trembling as she turned the latch. Standing in the fog, silhouetted by lantern light, was a tall figure, cloaked in black. His face was hidden by a broad-brimmed hat, and a scarf that concealed his jaw. Evening, the man said, his voice low. I've come about the late Sir Arthur Greystone. Holmes stepped forward, eyes sharp. And who are you? The man removed his hat slowly. I'm Julian Derwent. Section 8. The Return of the Forgotten. The silence that followed the man's pronouncement lingered like a heavy fog. Julian Derwent. The name that had slithered through ancient ledgers, whispered letters, and cautious speculation now stood in the flesh before us, a phantom conjured not by superstition, but by blood. And legacy. Holmes regarded him with the cool scrutiny he reserved for rare specimens and complicated puzzles. Derwent stood tall, his dark cloak dusted with evening mist. a wide-brimmed hat in his gloved hand. His eyes, steel gray and gleaming, were not those of a man returning home. They were eyes sharpened by exile, by a life spent surviving in silence. "Assume," Holmes said, voice steady, "you have not come merely to pay your respects." Derwent tilted his head with a faint, ironic smile. "Astute as ever, Mr. Holmes. May I come in?" Holmes gave a curt nod. Mrs. Darlow, trembling at the threshold, opened the door wider. Derwent stepped inside without hesitation, his boots tapping lightly against the stone floor. The house seemed to shudder around him, as though aware that a long-banished soul had re-entered its heart. Lady Edith Greystone appeared in the hallway just as the front door shut behind us. She stopped dead, her hand clutching the back of an armchair. Her face turned ashen as she looked at the man before her. "You," she breathed. "Derwent," offered a small bow. "Edith, time has been generous to you. You're supposed to be dead." "A fiction like so many others in this house," he replied, "but convenient for some." Holmes gestured toward the drawing room. "Let's not circle around pleasantries. You reappear just as Sir Arthur dies under strange circumstances. Your name is buried in the Greystone archives. Your presence, I suspect, is not a coincidence." Derwent entered the drawing room as if he owned it, placing his gloves on the mantel with deliberate care. "Nothing here ever is," he said. "This house breeds purpose beneath every surface." "Purpose," Holmes said dryly, "or obsession?" Derwent's smile returned, this time tighter. "Perhaps both." He sat down with a quiet exhalation, folding his hands in his lap. "Arthur and I exchanged letters these past months, tentative at first, then more urgent. He believed the circle had been compromised, that someone within the family or the household was working against him." "The circle of the eye," I said. "Yes." Derwent looked toward me. "A society born of Elijah Greystone's doctrine, conceived not for power, as many assume, but for preservation. Preservation of knowledge, dangerous knowledge. Rituals, yes, but also information. Secrets not fit for public discourse." Holmes remained standing. "You speak of it as though it still breathes." Derwent's eyes did not waver. "Because it does." Lady Edith sat slowly, her voice brittle. "I warned Arthur. I told him that resurrecting the circle would end badly. And it has." "But you didn't stop him," Holmes observed. "I couldn't," she said. "He was obsessed. Once he found the texts beneath the chapel, he changed." Derwent nodded. "He believed he had found the Ophidian lens, the medallion Elijah, used in his final rites, the same one that granted him dominion over the circle." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "And where is this lens now?" Without hesitation, Derwent reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet pouch. From it he produced an object unlike any I had seen before, a gold medallion in the shape of a serpent devouring its own tail, encircling a glass orb etched with intricate runes. He handed it to Holmes, who held it up to the firelight. "Fascinating," Holmes murmured. "The symbols match those near the hidden passage by the old chapel. This is no mere ornament." "No," Derwent said. "It is both key and relic. Arthur believed it activated a mechanism beneath the manor, a lock within the stone. I believe he was correct." As Holmes continued to study the artifact, I moved toward the window. The fog outside had thickened to an eerie woolen density. The manor's gas lamps glowed dimly, halos of light swallowed by gray. "I must ask," I said, turning to Derwent, "where have you been all these years?" "Europe, Asia. I studied with the custodians of forgotten texts, with archivists of shadowed libraries. I sought the truth of the eye, not its myth, but its method. What I discovered made me fear its return. And yet here you are," Holmes said. "I came because Arthur summoned me," Derwent replied. "3 weeks ago. His letter said he found something beneath the house and ossuary chamber. He feared what it might awaken." Holmes frowned. "Awaken? A turn of phrase, perhaps, or perhaps not. The circle's final rite involves the awakening of the witness, a role meant to safeguard the line. Arthur believed the last true witness died with Julian Greystone in 1812, but he claimed to have found the mark again on someone here." At that, Lady Edith looked sharply toward the stairs. "Elena," she whispered. Derwent's silence confirmed her suspicion. "Do you think she's the witness?" I asked. "I think she thinks she is," Derwent said. "Or worse, she believes she should be." Before Holmes could respond, a sudden sound echoed above us, a crash, sharp and jarring. Holmes and I were already on our feet. "The study," he said. "Come, Watson." We climbed the stairs 2 at a time, lantern in hand. The eastern wing felt colder than before, the corridors unnaturally silent. When we reached Sir Arthur's study, the door stood ajar. Holmes pushed it open with care. Room was a mess. The window had been forced open, its latch broken. Papers were scattered, drawers pulled out. Holmes rushed to the desk and reached behind the 3rd drawer. "Damn it," he hissed. "The charter's gone." "The one you showed me?" I asked. He nodded. "Whoever was listening last night," they returned. And they knew exactly what they were looking for. Holmes knelt by the floor. "Footprints," he murmured. "Small. Female, perhaps. They matched the pattern by the tunnel entrance." "Clara?" I asked. "Or Elena," he said darkly. Back downstairs, Derwent stood by the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back. Holmes relayed the theft, and Derwent's expression hardened. "With the charter, they can attempt the rite," he said. "What does the rite entail?" I asked. Derwent hesitated. "It is symbolic, a ritual of recognition. The candidate must navigate the ossuary's path, place their blood upon the eye, and speak the oath. If successful, they're declared witness of the eye. In legend, the rite granted prophetic insight, but in truth it cements loyalty and control over the circle's resources." Holmes turned to the rest of us. "Then, tonight, we go into the tunnels." "All of us, even me?" asked Lady Greystone, pale but resolute. "You know this house better than anyone," Holmes said. "And if the final ceremony is to be completed, we must find the sanctuary before they do." Derwent nodded. "The chapel tunnel leads there. Arthur found the beginning. I know the path." We prepared as dusk deepened into night. Holmes packed lanterns, chalk, and a small revolver. I carried the journal of Elijah Greystone for reference. Derwent studied the symbols etched onto the medallion, muttering under his breath in a language I could not recognize. Before we departed, Holmes paused at the door and turned back. "There's still a piece missing," he said. "Someone within. This house Not Elena has guided this from the shadows. Someone who remains unseen. You think it's Clara? I asked. I think Clara is afraid, Holmes replied. And I think the true witness may not even know who they are. Outside, the wind had died completely, and the fog lay still as wool. Greystone Manor loomed behind us, its windows flickering like dying eyes. We descended into the tunnel beneath the wine cellar once more, this time together. Dot, and ahead of us, somewhere in the cold dark, waited the sanctuary. Dot and the truth. Dot section 9, the sanctuary beneath. The descent into the tunnels beneath Greystone Manor was unlike our previous forays. This time it was not simply Holmes and me, lantern in hand, chasing shadows and fragments. We were four: Holmes, myself, Lady Edith Greystone, and Julian Derwent. And each step into the subterranean dark felt weighted with the gravity of legacy, an unseen danger. The air grew colder as we passed the threshold beneath the wine cellar. The stone stairs, hewn unevenly by generations past, echoed faintly underfoot. Our lanterns cast long, warped shadows against the moss-veined walls, and the silence aside from the distant dripping of water was absolute. Lady Edith wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I never imagined I would be down here again, she murmured. My father once warned us never to enter these passages. He said they had a will of their own. Holmes, at the front, stopped abruptly and turned to face her. What exactly did he mean? She hesitated. Only that. The tunnels were more than just architecture. He said they were built to obscure and protect, that some corridors were only meant to open for those who belonged to the bloodline. Holmes raised an eyebrow. Curious. That sort of statement would be dismissed as superstition were it not for the uncanny precision with which the manor has guarded its secrets. Derwent stepped past us with his lantern raised. This way, he said. The eastern branch splits into 3 forks. The central one leads to the sanctum. We continued in silence. The stone gave way to older construction. Bricked archways carved with symbols, some faded, others alarmingly fresh. Holmes paused at one arch, tracing a gloved finger over a glyph resembling the serpent devouring its tail, the same design on the Ophidian lens. These markings were refreshed recently, he muttered. Within the last month, Arthur must have been preparing the way. As we advanced, the corridor narrowed and the ceiling dropped low. Our footsteps grew softer, swallowed by the velvet hush of ages. The air was pungent with mildew and old earth, tinged with the faint scent of tallow candles. And then the corridor opened suddenly into a domed chamber, its ceiling a perfect half-sphere, supported by carved pillars. We had arrived. The sanctuary. It was breathtaking in its solemnity. At the center stood a circular altar made of black stone, veined with silver. Embedded in its surface was a shallow basin, now dry, though faint streaks of red along its edges suggested recent use. Around it, the walls were lined with alcoves, each containing a pedestal holding an item: an hourglass, a vial, a ring, a rolled scroll sealed in wax, and other curious relics. Holmes circled the altar carefully, his lantern casting light over the glyphs etched into the floor. These markings are directional, he murmured, a ritual path. The participant must follow a sequence before completing the rite. Lady Edith stepped beside him, her expression grim. This chamber predates the manor. I believe it belonged to Elijah Greystone himself. My grandmother once mentioned the birthroom of knowledge. I thought it a metaphor. Derwent approached the altar reverently and removed the ophidian lens from his pocket. He knelt and inserted it into a recess in the basin. It fit perfectly. With a low click, something within the altar shifted. A humming began deep and resonant, like the purring of ancient machinery. Then the walls moved. No dash. Revealed. Panels on either side of the chamber slid open with a slow grind, revealing niches, hidden until now. One held a tall mirror framed in obsidian, its surface clouded yet pulsing faintly with inner light. The other held a single stone tablet, etched with characters not quite Latin, not quite Greek. Holmes turned slowly. This is no ordinary sanctum. This was meant to guard knowledge, perhaps even to transform those who passed through its rites. He stepped closer to the mirror, eyes narrowing. There's something beneath the surface. He reached into his coat and drew a pouch of chalk dust. Gently, he tossed a pinch over the mirror. For a moment, nothing. Then shapes formed a room. Stone walls, a figure hooded in black. The reflection showed not our chamber, but another space. Somewhere else in the tunnels. And someone was there. Watching. Holmes turned instantly. That is no trick of glass. That is a live reflection. We are not alone. Just then a distant sound echoed from the corridor footsteps. Fast, light, growing nearer. Someone's coming, I whispered. Holmes motioned for the lights to be lowered. Derwent extinguished his lantern. We crouched in silence, breaths shallow, ears straining. The footsteps stopped outside the sanctuary. Then a soft voice called out, "Julian?" It was Elena. Derwent rose cautiously and moved toward the entrance. "Elena?" he said. "How did you—" "I followed you," she said, stepping into the light. Her eyes glimmered with something not quite surprise, not quite triumph. "You should have known I would." Her gaze swept the chamber, pausing on the altar, the mirror, the open walls. "So it's real," she whispered. "The sanctuary." She stepped closer. "I knew it existed. I've read Arthur's journals. He was too cautious, too burdened by guilt. But I knew the right would lead here. And now it's mine." Derwent's voice was tight. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know enough," she replied. "Arthur believed the ophidian lens could awaken the eye and choose the next witness. I'm the only one who could complete the path." Holmes, who had remained perfectly still, now spoke. "You believe you're the rightful successor?" "I am," she said, her voice unwavering. "I bear the mark. On my shoulder, just like the texts described. Arthur saw it. That's why." He started writing again to Julian. He doubted me. But I studied. I proved my worth. This house is mine. The legacy is mine. Holmes stepped away from the mirror. "Then prove it." "What?" "You said the right would recognize its heir, complete the path, take the oath. If the eye accepts you, then we'll leave this chamber, and the matter will be settled." Derwent stared at Holmes. "You're serious?" "There's someone waiting in the west wing," she said. "He asked for you both by name." Holmes stood instantly. "Did he give a title?" "No, but he left a card." She handed it over. A thick parchment, stamped with a sigil and Ouroboros, circled around an eye. Holmes's fingers curled around it. The circle's original seal, not a forgery. We followed her down the corridor to the same hall where Arthur's private library had once stood. At the far end, the double doors were ajar. Inside, a man stood near the window. He was tall, silver-haired, with the bearing of a retired statesman and the subtle watchfulness of a seasoned operative. He turned as we entered, offering a faint smile. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, a pleasure." Holmes remained still. "Your name?" "I've gone by many, but today, for your purposes, Gideon will suffice." I stepped forward. "Were you part of the circle?" He gave a slow nod. "Not merely part. I was one of its founders." Holmes stiffened. "Elijah Greystone founded the circle. Elijah was the first symbol. I was the first architect. The circle's roots extend beyond this house. It was a society forged to preserve knowledge we feared the world would forget. But in preserving it, we let it fester." "What do you want?" Holmes asked. "To end it," Gideon said simply. "Clara was a zealot. Elena, an extremist. Edith, I believe, can be a reformer. I've come to offer a Ledger One final volume. The names of every remaining circle affiliate across Europe. Bankers, scholars, occultists, all of them." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And in return?" "Nothing," Gideon said. "I am tired, Mr. Holmes, and this legacy has become a poison." He stepped forward and placed a thick leather-bound book in Holmes's hands. "I ask only that you give this to no one. Read it. Understand it, then decide." And with that he walked past us and out the door, vanishing into the mist before a single question could pin him down. Later that night, in the quiet of the guest suite, Holmes opened the book. I stood beside him as page after page revealed names, dates, transactions, letters all connected by the same insignia. "You believe him?" I asked. "I believe his exhaustion," Holmes murmured. "It is harder to fake than guilt." We stayed, awake until dawn. By morning the carriage was ready. Edith met us at the steps, dressed in black and deep green, her features calm but unreadable. "I've asked the workers to board up the west wing," she said. "No more private libraries. No more secret parlors." Holmes inclined his head. "And the rest of the house?" She hesitated. "It will become a school for girls, modern, secular, named not for Arthur or Elijah, but for my mother, who hated secrets." We both smiled at that. Holmes climbed into the carriage. I lingered. "A moment longer. Are you frightened?" I asked her. She looked up at the manor. "Yes, but less than I was yesterday." As the carriage pulled away, Holmes remained silent, his gloved fingers tracing invisible lines along the edge of Gideon's ledger. At the bend in the road, I glanced back. The manor stood still, and in the high gable window I thought I saw a movement, a flicker of a figure, watching, waiting. "Elena?" I murmured. Holmes did not answer, but his gaze lingered. Section 1-3. Epilogue. The watchers in the fog. It had been 3 weeks since our return to Baker Street, and life had resumed its familiar cadence. The thick early autumn fog had returned to London, casting long shadows over the gas-lit streets and blurring the boundary between the everyday and the mysterious. Newspapers had long since moved on from the Greystone incident. To the public it was a tale of familial inheritance and tragic error. No mention was made of ancient societies, whispering rites, or the Ophidian lens. The official record, as it so often does, omitted the most uncomfortable truths. Mrs. Hudson had taken particular joy in returning our rooms to their habitual disarray. Holmes's experiments had resumed with equal vigor. Beakers bubbled in glass. Slides littered every surface of the table beneath the window. And yet, amid the clutter and familiar scent of tobacco and chemical solvents, there was a quietness in Holmes that I had not seen in many months. He read Gideon's ledger daily. I once found him, hours after midnight, seated in the study chair with the book on his lap, a single lamp casting a golden halo over the faded pages. His fingers moved slowly across the names, not in haste or judgment, but in reverence, as though he were tracing the outline of a vanishing world. One morning, I found him staring out the window into the dense fog below. He did not turn when I entered. "Watson," he said, "do you recall the name Frederick Van Riel?" "Vaguely. Dutch antiquarian, wasn't he? We once retrieved a stolen manuscript from his private vault in Amsterdam." Holmes nodded. "He appears here." He tapped the ledger. "Page 273, an early Circle member. But according to museum archives, he died in 1893. Perhaps a coincidence? Perhaps. But the notes beside his name are annotated in a newer hand, a cipher. Clara's, I believe. Updated as recently as 6 months ago. You think Van Riel is still alive? Or someone using his name? The implications were unsettling. Despite Clara's confession and the dissolution of the London branch, it seemed the Circle's web extended farther than we had anticipated, intercontinental, perhaps intergenerational. A slow beast, its coils still stirring beneath old cities and decaying cathedrals. One evening, as the fire crackled low in the grate, and Holmes idly plucked his violin, I broached a question I had been nursing for days. If you had not been summoned to Greystone, I said, what do you suppose would have happened? Holmes lowered his instrument and considered. Elena would have returned, he said. She would have forced the sanctuary open, perhaps with force. Clara, in turn, would have acted again. Arthur's death would not have been the last. Lady Edith? He leaned back in his chair. She would have been forced to choose. Continue a legacy she did not believe in, or tear it down and risk becoming its next victim. The burden would have been unbearable. You gave her another option, I said. He tilted his head. No, she gave herself that. I merely cleared the fog. There was a quiet knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson peeked in. There's a letter for you, Mr. Holmes, marked urgent. Holmes took the envelope and opened it slowly. His brow furrowed. A letter from Belgium, he said, from an Inspector de Vries in Brussels. They've uncovered an abandoned estate outside Ghent. Underground crypts, strange inscriptions, and a symbol etched into the stonework. A serpent devouring its tail. My breath caught. Another sanctuary, perhaps, or an echo. He stood and tossed the letter onto the desk. He's asked for my assistance. I stared at him. Will you go? Holmes gave a faint smile. In time. That night, as we dined beneath low candlelight, Holmes grew unusually philosophical. No, Watson, most men believe history moves in straight lines, from darkness to enlightenment, from superstition to reason. But it does not. It coils. It returns. The same ideas reemerge in different robes. The same fears find new faces. We have not defeated the Circle, merely unmasked one of its many masks. And yet, I replied, the light you shine into. Those masks give others the courage to resist them." Holmes did not reply, but I saw the flicker of acknowledgment in his eyes. Days later, I returned to Greystone Manor alone. Lady Edith had invited me to observe the school's opening. The manor was transformed. Children's laughter rang through the halls once haunted by secrets. The study had become a library, the drawing room a music chamber. The air was lighter, and the servants smiled without caution. But as I walked the grounds in the fading light, I found myself pausing by the chapel. Its stones remained sealed, but something tugged at the back of my mind. A memory, a whisper, knelt beside the foundation and pressed my hand against the mortar cold beneath. The laughter beneath the sunshine and open windows. Something ancient still slumbered, not malicious, not awakened, but waiting. Not everything buried remains dead. When I returned to Baker Street, Holmes had packed a valise. "You're leaving?" I asked. He nodded. "The continent. Belgium first, then perhaps the Carpathians. I've received a second letter." "From whom?" He handed it to me. "No return address. No signature? Just 4 words. I await you." I looked up sharply. "Elena?" He didn't answer, just smiled, and then he was gone. Final section. The final deduction. Expanded version. The rain had abated, leaving Greystone Manor draped in a damp stillness. Low clouds crawled across the sky, and the last glimmers of daylight cast a silver sheen across the windows. The great house stood hushed and watchful, like a beast that had exhaled its last secret, yet waited to see what the night would bring. Inside the drawing room, a fire flickered weakly, casting dancing shadows. On the stone hearth, Sherlock Holmes stood before it, his lean frame silhouetted in amber light, eyes narrowed not in anger, but in something more piercing resolve. He was not simply considering a conclusion. He was preparing to deliver it like a surgeon, with precision and finality. Seated across from him on the high-backed settee was Clara Middleton, hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes red-rimmed but steady. The fire had returned to her expressionless desperation now, more acceptance, as though she'd made peace with the consequences of her long-held silence. I sat to her left, notebook closed, fingers laced loosely, my own thoughts tangled with unease. Lady Edith Greystone stood by the window, shoulders tense, her silhouette rigid against the fading gray. She had not spoken since Holmes had summoned us all to the room, and I could see in her posture the weight of what she suspected would come next. Holmes turned, lifting a small bundle of parchment from the mantelpiece. Holmes turned, lifting a small bundle of parchment from the mantelpiece. It was tied with a simple black ribbon. His fingers worked the knot carefully. "This," he began, "is the final piece of your puzzle, Miss Middleton. Or perhaps it is. Better to say, the final veil you've used to shield the truth." Clara looked up. "I've told you all there is to tell, Mr. Holmes." Holmes smiled faintly. "Indeed, you've told me all that suited your narrative. A confession crafted not from the truth, but from obligation. Guilt, perhaps, but not clarity." Lady Edith stirred. "Are you saying Clara was lying?" "No," Holmes replied. "She told the truth, but not the whole of it." He spread the papers across the small writing desk. "When we opened the false altar within the Greystone Chapel, we found the Ophidian lens as expected. But more than that, we found letters, journals, and ciphered correspondences. Many were signed by Clara. Some were addressed to someone you claimed not to have seen in years. He looked up. Elena. Clara's lips parted, but she said nothing. She returned to Greystone weeks before Arthur Greystone's death. Holmes continued. She did not enter through the front. She came by night by the root cellar. The groundskeeper, John Lafferty, confirmed seeing a cloaked figure near the chapel just 3 days before Arthur died. When we searched the hidden corridor below the sanctuary, we found a discarded cloak, muddy with recent soil. Helena had returned, and you hid her here. Clara's composure faltered. She needed safety. She was frightened, hunted. Holmes's tone softened, but only slightly. And she needed the lens, which you gave her access to. I never thought she'd kill him, Clara said. I told her to confront him, to make him see what he'd done, but not that. Never that. She poisoned the brandy, Holmes said, and then disappeared again. And you, loyal to both Arthur and Elena in your own way, chose to take the blame, to protect her, out of maternal loyalty. She is all I have left, Clara whispered. Lady Edith stepped forward, voice tight. You helped her kill my father. No, Holmes interjected. She helped Elena escape her past, and she tried to keep the circle from reviving. But she failed both counts. He laid one of the letters on the table. This one is recent, dated less than a month before Arthur's death. In it, Elena outlines her plan. She intended to use the lens to claim legitimacy over a new branch of the Circle, using Greystone as the seat of its rebirth. She believed her lineage, obscured by time and secrecy, gave her the right. She saw Arthur as a relic and obstacle, and she knew he would never willingly part with the artifact. Clara bowed her head. She had been radicalized. I didn't know the extent. When she returned, I saw the fire in her eyes, the same madness that once lived in Arthur. I thought I could temper it. Lady Edith's eyes shimmered with restrained fury. And now she's gone, Clara whispered. But she returned, for the Circle, for the lens, for me. I can feel it. Holmes stepped away from the hearth and turned to Edith. You asked me once, Lady Greystone, how to end a secret society that has survived a century of fire, fraud, and fragmentation. The answer is simple. Truth. Shine a light so bright it blinds their shadows. She nodded, slowly. And what of Elena? She will surface again, Holmes said. These ideologues always do. She is too proud to vanish quietly, too convinced of her righteousness. But now you know her, and that gives you power. Holmes retrieved a small leather pouch from his coat and placed it on the table. The lens, returned to your care, as promised. What you choose to do with it will determine whether the Circle truly dies. Edith hesitated, then took the pouch and set it gently beside the fire. Without another word, she opened the cast-iron stove's lower hatch, revealing the licking flame inside. I started forward. You intend to? Yes, she said. Holmes didn't stop her dot with a single motion. She dropped the lens into the fire. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the flames surged, curling in strange iridescent hues as the ancient crystal refracted, and split the light one final time. Dot had cracked with a soft, sorrowful pop. Then silence. Ashes settled. Clara wept, not with anguish, but with relief. The room exhaled. Holmes drew his coat tightly about him. There is nothing more to solve. Outside, the fog had thickened. The trees swayed gently in the wind, their bare branches rattling like dry bones against the stone wall's dot as we made our way toward the front door. I turned to Holmes. "Do you think that's truly the end of it?" He paused on the threshold, rain glistening at the edge of the portico. "No," he said, "but it is the end of this beginning." I followed him into the night, the gravel crunching beneath our feet as we approached the waiting carriage. The manor loomed behind us, its windows dark, the flames within fading. Yet something remained an unease, a whisper in the fog dot as we boarded, and the driver urged the horses forward. I caught a glimpse of movement at the far edge of the estate. A shadow, a woman in a dark cloak. She did not wave. She did not speak, but she watched. "Holmes," I said, "there by the hedge." He turned but saw nothing, only fog and trees. "Elena?" I asked. He said nothing, but the way he sat straighter, the way his eyes lingered, he had seen it to Dot back at Baker Street. Holmes removed his gloves and poured us both brandy. He stared into the fire, fingers steepled, the weight of the day hanging from his shoulders like a wet coat. "You were right," I said. "It wasn't just about the lens. It was about what people are willing to believe in." Holmes gave a tired smile. "And what they are willing to kill for." He lifted his glass to endings. I raised mine. And beginnings. Outside, the rain began again.